This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. I think it is a universal take that the room that everybody should be the most concerned about on this Cleveland Browns roster, it's not quarterback. As much as quarterback is what it is, we'll get to that in the quarterback review. It's not wide receiver, as much youth is in that room. It's not tight end. It's not linebacker. It's not the offensive line. The room that I'm the most concerned about is the room that they're going to be depending on the most, that has the least amount of answers. And see, when we talk about quarterback, I don't think they're going to be depending on quarterback as much as some people think. I think the Browns' offense is going to be heavily reliant on that run game, right? When it comes to other position groups that might not be as strong, linebacker, we'll talk about that in the linebacker review. I'm not really as worried about linebacker because you have a young star in Carson Schlesinger, and you have a young former star in Quincy Williams. So not really too worried about that. But the area where I am the most worried about, the area where I am the most concerned about of this football team is cornerback. Because, yes, love Denzel Ward. We have Denzel Ward. Outside of Denzel Ward, we got questions at various levels of quality in this defensive back room. And that is the most concerning thing on this roster. I think this Browns defense, whether they reach a top 8 level this year in the absence of Miles, in their first year absent of Miles, or if they fall well below that, is going to be heavily dependent on the play of these defensive backs. And I think the Browns are kind of crossing their fingers and hoping. Like, if any position group reminds me of the mindset that the Browns went into with offensive line last year, it's defensive back for sure, right? Like last year with the offensive line, there was a lot of crossing the fingers and praying that it worked out, right? I hope that Joe Bitonio gets back to form. I hope that Wyatt Teller has a good season. I hope that Jack Conklin can stay healthy for some reason. I hope that this guy that we signed off the Rams practice squad can hold up as a backup tackle. I hope Corn Lucas is going to be good. We were doing a lot of this last year, right? Crossing our fingers and hoping for the offensive line. Not really having a defined plan, relying on veterans, not having a ton of depth behind those veterans. So if we got one spill of injuries, it was going to be a disaster. Unfortunately, defensive back is that same way for this team, right? We got Denzel Ward, who we could believe in and trust in. But Denzel Ward will miss some games. He won't miss as many games as people on Twitter make it seem like he misses, but he going to miss at least 2 games. You know what I mean? Like, Denzel not going to play 17. He going to play 15, and on a good year. Bad year, maybe he plays 12, right? But he going to miss some games, right? At least 2. And then you have Tyson Campbell, whole thing coming out of Jacksonville wasn't his, ability to be consistent. Right, so you'll worry about that because you're really betting on Tyson Campbell being consistent this year. And then we got the rest of the room to talk about. But we'll get into that. Got to thank my sponsor first, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jeremy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. All right, so let's talk about these defensive backs. All right, so what we know about this room is Denzel Ward, all pro caliber corner, one of the best man covered corners in football. And he's been that way for a while. He hasn't really had the interception numbers or the turnover numbers that you would want to see out of a corner of his caliber, but I think a lot of that had to do with how teams chose to play the Cleveland Browns with Myles Garrett exploding as a superstar over the last few years, right? We saw it in games where Myles' presence would force teams to get rid of the ball quickly, not really test downfield. And that was something that we saw. I think, the best example of it is the Pittsburgh game last year, where the Pittsburgh Steelers literally refused to throw a downfield pass because they were terrified of Myles Garrett getting into the backfield and potentially having the single season sack record broke in Pittsburgh against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, and that wasn't in Pittsburgh. That was in Cleveland. They just didn't want to have it done against them. So, we've seen stuff like that happen with Myles. We know that Myles' impact really does give these corners a ton of freedom and flexibility. And with no presence like that this year, I think it's going to be something that's going to be a test for some of the lesser corners on the roster for sure. But something I think Denzel Ward's going to be able to get away with, right? I think Denzel Ward is actually going to be able to have a pretty good statistical season because of it if he stays on the Browns the whole year, which is another question that we got to get into, right? But if he stays on the Browns for the whole year, I think he's going to get plenty of opportunities to make plays, and we're going to see that a lot of the lack of statistical greatness for Denzel Ward has really been about the fact that he has had to take a step in the shadow for Myles Garrett over the last few years. But there is that element to talk about, right? Denzel Ward's an older player now. It's crazy to say that about somebody who was in the 2018 draft, but that's just the point of history that we're at, man. I know it makes me feel old too. But Denzel Ward is getting closer to 30, which means that there are questions about whether he matches up to the Cleveland Browns timeline. My opinion on this is that it's okay to have some veterans on young teams. You know what I mean? I think everybody kind of views it. Once you're 30, we got to get rid of you and be more efficient with our money. I think efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes you need some pieces in the organization that remind people that playing here means something, that it matters to be a Cleveland Brown, and that it's okay to be inefficient a little bit with age or money for players that have done a lot for you. You know what I mean? Like, the Eagles are as analytic forward as any team in the NFL. You could argue even more analytic forward than the Cleveland Browns. So they've kept Brandon Graham's old ass on that roster for like 8 years. You know what I mean? Like, we can keep players that are a little bit older. I don't think that automatically means we should just get rid of guys because they hit certain age thresholds. That's me. I don't know if that's Andrew Berry. Right? Like, Andrew Berry might not share that opinion. It is possible Andrew Berry looks at Denzel's age, sees what's out there in the market during the trade deadline, and something hits his value. And that's the thing with Andrew Berry. We talked about it before. It's not about if he's willing to trade a player. He's willing to trade everybody on his roster if he could. It's more about if you're willing to match his price. Everybody has a price with Andrew Berry. Are you going to find that? Are you going to match that price? I don't think right now anybody's going to be willing to match the price for Denzel Ward, but an injury or two to a competing team during the trade deadline, things could get a little interesting, right? So don't know if Denzel Ward's going to be here the whole year. I think that is a question mark. And then beyond this year, there are question marks about Denzel, if he's going to stay here, if the Browns going to give him an extension, all that stuff. Which brings the attention to Tyson Campbell, who I'm the most nervous about, because this is the player we know the least about that the Browns are betting the most on, right? Other players, other positions where we have question marks, we're not betting as much on those players, right? Zion Johnson is a player that we have a lot of questions about, but the Browns have invested a first-round pick into the left tackle situation. They've invested money in veterans and Elgin Jenkins, into that center position potentially, and they also got Parker Brailsford. So you feel like, okay, yeah, you put some investment in there with Zion Johnson, but you have some insurance with those draft picks and the players that you put around him. There's no insurance here with Tyson Campbell. If Tyson Campbell is not good, then that's just going to be what it is. There's no way to get around it. If we're looking for the position group that is kind of left stranded the most after the Miles trade, right? Because trading a player like Miles, especially on the defensive side of the ball, it changes the makeup of your entire roster because the Browns were built around having Myles Garrett on defense. That's been the idea over the last 3 years, is that we got Myles Garrett, you don't, and that means that we could build a defense that's structured the way it is. Defensive line, they were able to add enough young pieces to be able to get past that, right? Linebacker, they got lucky. Well, not lucky, but they hit on Carson Schlesinger, right? Which changes a lot, right? This corner room is the one room where I'm like, ooh, we are set up for a defense that has Myles Garrett, and this corner room does not have Myles Garrett anymore, right? Like, this is the room that I think is the most vulnerable because of this. Because if Tyson Campbell is not good, then what do we do? Who else is on this roster to fill the void for this team? And this starts to, again, sound like what we said about the offensive line last year, right? And this is what makes me nervous. Yeah, you're going to have some help from your corner, from your safeties, right? Ronnie Hickman's going to roll down sometimes. Grant Delpit's going to roll down sometimes. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is going to roll down sometimes, and maybe that stops the bleeding. But, like, let me just list off the names that the Browns have at corner behind Denzel Ward and Tyson Campbell. Anthony Kendall, Nate Evans, Tyron Herring. Y'all know who that is? I don't know who that is. Dom Jones, D'Angelo Ross, Trey Abrams. Does any of those guys say number 2 corner to you when Denzel Ward misses 3 games and, Tyson Campbell has to slide over? Who you want to see that guy? You want to see D'Angelo Ross on the island with Jamar Chase? I ain't trying to see it. T. Higgins? No disrespect, but that's not enough. I mean, the slot situation for this Browns team has also been an issue, right? Right now, at slot corner, they got Miles Harden starting. He was a starter last year, 300 snaps in the slot. Did he get 300 or 400 snaps in the slot? My bad. 428 snaps in the slot last year. So they're unquestioned starting slot corner. He was not very good last year, but, he wasn't a disaster. And that was an area, if you watch my coverage from this team last year, that we were like, wow, they're bad at slot corner. They need to get more slot corners on this team. Well, now they don't have any more slot corners. They have Miles Bryant and then, not Miles Bryant, Miles Harden and Miles Bryant backing up Miles Harden. They didn't draft any slot corners. And they have very weak outside corners outside their top 2. You add into this that while Jared Verse is a really good player, and I'm really excited to see him in brown and orange, he's not going to have the presence that Myles Garrett had, which means that teams are probably going to be more willing to try our corners. They're going to be more willing to call concepts that hold the ball longer, that test these corners even more, right? What I'm worried about with Tyson Campbell is that he struggled in Jacksonville. Came to Cleveland, looked a lot better. But what's the difference between Jacksonville and Cleveland? Jacksonville has a good defensive line with some really good players, right? Josh Hines-Allen is no joke. But the Browns had Miles. And ultimately, the Browns having Miles made a huge difference in Tyson Campbell's performance. Because all those double moves that they were hitting on Tyson Campbell in Jacksonville, which if you go back and you watch the tape, they were hitting a ton of double moves on him, weren't really options when he was on the Cleveland Browns, because nobody in their right mind is going to tell their quarterback to take a 7-step drop so a wide receiver can get a double move in against Myles Garrett. That's just not a thing. That's not going to happen. But now it is. So Tyson Campbell is now in a situation defensively that's a lot more similar to where he struggled in Jacksonville than where he succeeded last year in Cleveland, because the Browns don't have Miles anymore, right? So that's going to be a big issue. If Tyson Campbell looks more like the dude in Jacksonville that had to get traded, it's a problem. If Denzel Ward misses more than 3 games, it's a huge problem. If Tyson Campbell somehow gets injured and Denzel Ward misses games, then we're starting Dom Jones and Anthony Kendall. You feel good about that? I don't even know what jersey number Anthony Kendall wears. I'm not even sure that's a real name, a real player on this team. But that's where we at. That's where we at. If there's any room, again, that makes me worried in the same way that the offensive line last year made me worried, it's corner. We aren't just thin here. We have no depth whatsoever. We have nothing behind those 2 corners. I would love it if we signed some proven NFL depth. We don't need to go out and swing for like a Trayvon Diggs or anything stupid like that. You know what I mean? But like, bring in somebody. We got to bring in somebody who's not a fixture on practice squads to back up these 2 corners. And I think what the Browns' plan here at corner is simple. They are crossing their fingers and praying that somebody steps up. And I think that's not a good idea. This cornerback room, and more specifically the health of Denzel Ward and the consistency of Tyson Campbell, if those guys are healthy and play good, then there's nothing to worry about because they'll be good enough to where we don't have to worry. We got enough safeties to where if those guys hold up, we're fine, right? I don't want to paint it as doom and gloom. If Denzel Ward stays healthy, if Tyson Campbell continues to play the way he did last year, then we're good. But if Denzel Ward is less than healthy, if Tyson Campbell does struggle a little bit more like he did in Jacksonville this year than last year, then we got problems. We got major problems. I don't know if it's going to be deep enough to tank the entire defense, but it's certainly going to be a thing that annoys you. But yeah, this corner room, I'm worried about it. I think this is going to be the focus point for the Andrew Berry deniers amongst Browns fans, right? So if you're an Andrew Berry hater, I'm telling you right now, this is probably where you're going to spend most of your time because this is probably the most neglected area of the roster for Andrew, which is hilarious because remember there was a point in time where people were convinced that Andrew Berry just had an obsession with drafting corners. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.